Good morning, and thank you for coming. This is somewhat an unusual Mass in that we have two parts of Peter's family celebrating this Mass. Here we are, we're the American family, and over there on that video will be the Australian family. They could not come due to the time of the year and the impossibility of getting airplane tickets. So they are long distance, and we are sending the Americans. We're crossing oceans and continents to get to Australia. We're sending our deepest sympathy to Peter's family, Alice and Doreen, his two sister-in-laws, Peter's nieces and nephews, Robert and Jennifer, Sean and Helen, Paul and Petra, Liam and Mary, Catherine, Louise, Michael, Elizabeth, Teresa, and Leonie, and to Peter's friends over there, Virginia Partington, Eileen Linkson, Michael Jelly, Pam and Tom McGuire, Kath and Leo Myatt. And I hope I didn't leave anyone out over there, but we are thinking of you. Peter's family, as you can see, is large, and they were very good to Peter. They couldn't come here today, but they came many times to Peter, and they came at the right times. They came when Peter could see them and hear them and touch them. So I have a feeling, everyone over in Australia, that Peter is coming to you today. Now, they wanted to say something. The Australians wanted to say something. So I'm going to share a little bit of my time with a voice from Australia, Peter's nephew, Sean. And Sean, I have to tell you, I have to confess, I've cut down your eulogy a little bit. But there are full copies available at the back of church, and I know Sean is going to be giving the eulogy again in Australia. But Sean says to all of you, good morning. On behalf of the family, we thank you all for attending this morning. It is with a heavy heart that we cannot be there. However, we are celebrating Peter's life with two memorials, one in Adelaide, South Australia, on December 30th, and another in Melbourne on January 5th. Peter's characteristics included being down to earth, funny, quick-witted, liked to give advice, and at times did not like to receive advice. Perceptive, intelligent, extremely well-read, a lover of theater, music, and movies. You could ask him any questions within these categories, and he would know the answer, plus give you some more information to boot. He was great to be with, never boring, inquisitive, thoughtful, and considered. He'd ask himself, if you asked him anything, he would answer, but you could count on him being a different slant or view on things, generally, with a touch of wit and humor. And Sean writes, in my research about Peter, I came across part of the Carmelite Constitution, whereby Carmelites live their lives in allegiance to Christ through a commitment to seek the face of the living God, through community, fraternity, through service in the midst of the people. Peter certainly ticked all the boxes and attained a 10 out of 10 score on all points. The highlights of my experience with Peter happened recently, this last August, when I, Sean, and my wife, Helen, spent a week with Peter in New York. The highlights included taking Peter to Central Park on a beautiful sunny day and enjoying ice cream while watching children who were being entertained by a performer. He had not been in the park for 5 or 6 years. The greatest moment, though, of that visit was the day that we went to see the Book of Mormon on Broadway. Firstly, I had to get tickets to the #1 show on Broadway. That was not easy, but I did it. Christina, his caregiver and right hand, booked the Amulet for 1 p.m. for the 2 p.m. show. The vehicle did not arrive, but instead sent a Lincoln Town Car. The rain came and started to pour. I had no option but to lift Peter out of the chair into the car and to disassemble the wheelchair to fit in the trunk of the car, for which you need a degree. We got there as the bells were ringing for curtain call. What a show, and he enjoyed every minute of it. To see his joy and happiness was just priceless. He had not been to a show for 18 months. The time came to go back to Mary Manning Walsh for the 4:30 pickup. A call came through from the ambulette and said they would not be there until 5:45. I couldn't trust them as they let us down, so I decided to take our chances, and we went off on what turned out to be an exciting adventure. Sean pushed him all this way in the wheelchair. We visited Rockefeller Center, St. Patrick's Cathedral. We ended up on Lexington Avenue on the Green Line subway, 6. I saw the wheelchair symbol at the 59th and Lexington Avenue entrance. I was in luck. So down we went in the elevator. We got the tickets, and lo and behold, a train was pulling in. We only had to go one stop to 68th Street. We got off, and I was looking for the lift to take us to ground level, only to be told there is no lift at that station. The next lift was at 125th Street. I told him, "No worries, Peter, with the true Aussie spirit, we will fix this up and get out of this mess." So I grabbed 2 young fellows and asked them to help me carry the chair up 17 steps. And we did it. And we're at the exit level only to find out that we were not at ground level. And the 2 guys had vanished. I noticed an exit to Hunter College, and I explained my plight to the security guard, who kindly let us go through the college and use the freight elevator to get to ground level. We only had 7 more blocks to walk. All Peter said to me was, "I saw 2 performances in one afternoon. The show was great, but I didn't know I was going to be in the second performance." Sean writes, "I wish to recognize some people. First of all, Peter's friends and those who helped him in his time with drugs and alcohol. Your support and care was very important to him. And to Christina Mills, his caregiver, who for the last 7 years took good care of him. A huge support, who saw all the ups and downs, a great friend, and I have no doubt will be with Peter always." I worked out that Christina was with Peter approximately 2,400 days. And I cannot think of another person other than his mother who spent that much time with Peter. In closing, to all his friends that made Peter's life worthwhile in the various parishes he worked in, to all the Carmelites in the community that he lived in, I thank you. Peter's initials were PB. He certainly gave his personal best to all that was involved. We are extremely proud of Peter. He achieved much, the boy from a little town in Maitland making it in the Big Apple. And in the words of the American Frank Sinatra, you certainly did it your way. Many thanks. God bless. Sean. And Sean, I didn't cut out too much, did I? Once upon a time, not too long ago, in a land called Oz, sometimes known as Australia, Peter Byrth appeared. He was the 3rd son of Tom Byrth and Susan Saint. I always loved Peter's story because all the names of the people sound like they come from a storybook. Peter's older brothers were Leo and Bill, and they lived in a very small town in Maitland in South Australia. Peter's father worked in a boot shop. When Peter was about 5, it was New Year's of 1938, his mother took Peter and Leo and Bill, the boys, to the beach for Christmas Eve. Now remember, everything is upside down in Australia. So Christmas and New Year's is smack in the middle of summer. So they went to the beach. Peter's father stayed back in Maitland, and since it was so hot, he and his friend went swimming, and unfortunately, on that day, he drowned. And he left a widow and 3 young boys. And of course, they were stunned. And all the money that Susan had was in her purse. And in her purse was 5 cents. 3 young boys and 5 cents. Could anyone possibly survive that? It's said by Peter's family and friends that Peter was very much like his mother. She was straightforward, she was determined, she was a survivor. Susan was said to be able to make anything and everything out of nothing. And happily, they all prospered and survived, but with great effort. Susan immediately took every job she could find in that small town. She cleaned, she washed, she ironed. She worked for Mrs. Harris on her farm. Mrs. Harris' daughter, Virginia, became like a daughter and a sister to Peter. She worked for Molly Jelly, who owned the hotel in the town, which became a gathering place for the town. Molly's son became like a son to Susan and like a brother to Peter. Susan wanted her 3 boys to have every chance and every possibility. She worked, but to keep them busy, she made sure they had little jobs. And she tried to teach them every skill that she could think of. She had them learn how to chop wood, how to tend gardens, how to farm, how to cook, how to sew, how to knit. And they were to be independent. They were to have skills that they could survive with. Leo, his brother, learned printing at the local print shop, and he became a career printer. Bill used, of all things, the sewing skills, and he got a job in the local tailor shop. Later, as a young man, when he went to London, he got a job with one of the most prestigious London tailors. And when he went back to Australia, he was much sought after as being a London quality tailor. And Peter. Now, I've lived with Peter many years, and I must say that I have never seen any evidence of any of these skills. That's true. One night, Peter and Lenita, the housekeeper, was gone to Chile, and Peter and I had eaten all the food in the refrigerator, so we had to go to the supermarket, and we bought supper, which was a chicken pot pie, and it looked wonderful. We took it home, and only to discover neither Peter nor I could turn on the oven. He wasn't handy. Peter, the youngest, belonged to a different world. He was smart, he was witty, he was intelligent, and a lot of his skills and tastes came from a lady in Maitland by the name of Eileen Daly, and she was the artsy lady in the little town. She taught Peter the piano, and Peter loved her. The parish priest, Father Barry, told Peter's mother that her son was very gifted, and she should really try to get a scholarship for Peter to go away to Sacred Heart College in Adelaide, which is grades 8 to 12. It was run by the Maris brothers, and he tried, and Peter won the scholarship. This poor boy won a scholarship to a boarding school, and they packed him up, and off he went. And he spent 5 years there, and it was great joy for Susan to see her son achieve this. At school, Peter made many friends. One was a kid named Robert Stigwood. At the end of school, All of them would have to make career choices, where they were going to go and what they were going to do. Peter's brother Bill went to London, rented an apartment, got a job as a tailor. Peter's friend Paul Linkson joined him. Peter and his friend Robert decided they too would go to London and share that apartment. Robert actually went, but Peter at the last moment surprised everyone by choosing to enter the Carmelite Seminary. Robert went on to become a very famous producer of musicals. Peter went on to become a most wonderful priest. The Carmelites in Australia were so happy to have Peter join them. He was everything a priest should be. He was intelligent, he was a scholar, he was friendly, he was kind, he was compassionate, he was a believer. And the Carmelites in Australia made good use of Peter. He was ordained in 1959 and became a parish priest in Port Melbourne. He then became the headmaster of St. Simon Stock College in Pendle Hill, Sydney. Then he became the provincial of the Australian province in his early 30s. You know, it was the 60s, and every institution was looking for their John F. Kennedy, the young, bright, intelligent man who would lead them. And they found Peter. Peter fit the bill. And after 2 terms, he became the pastor of Adelaide Parish and then the head of a prestigious school, Whitefriars College in Victoria. What a career he had, and he was still only in his 40s. But there was one issue. There was a crack in Camelot. Peter was just like everybody else. There was one thing that could and was ruining him. For Peter, that thing was called alcohol. Everybody noticed but Peter. The Carmelites sent him to America to study for a year, and he did. But the degree was not his American gift. The gift was not study, but surrender. With the help of many friends, Peter learned to admit and surrender. And it was at that point that the wonderful Peter became the great Peter. The fault made the man, and the man was the message. It is that great Christian paradox. The cross redeems. It was a variation on the golden rule of Jesus. What others have done for you, you do for others. And Peter had that gift of healing. By listening and accepting people, he healed them. His priesthood was prophetic. Pope Francis recently met with all the heads of the religious male orders, and he told all those superiors, he said, "You are religious men. You are not to see yourself as helpers to the bishops. You are to see yourself as prophets." And our Carmelite charism is to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and of Mary and of one other person, an Old Testament prophet named Elijah. Prophets were not men who foretold the future. They were men who echoed the words of God and pointed out the divine presence in the ordinary world. Elijah lived at a time when it was thought that God worked through the king, the monarch, through the palace, through the temple. Elijah railed against that spirituality and saw God directly touching the poor, the needy, the ordinary. He found God not in the strong or the powerful, but Elijah found God in the quiet whisper, the silent sound, the ordinary. And that's what Peter did. People came to Peter, and he listened. He heard their sounds as they spoke, and he understood their silences. He listened, and Peter never defended a system, a theory. He listened, and he accepted. No matter what anyone said, he understood. He had compassion. Why? Because he had been there before. He listened, and no matter what anyone said, he respected that person. And that's how the healing began. To have that compassionate heart, that inclusive openness to reality, to the divine. People could say anything to Peter. They could say everything, every secret, every wound. And like his mother, Peter would assure that person that they were not bankrupt. They still had 5 cents. They had God's grace. And all they had to do was use it. Peter worked in Teaneck, he worked in Leonia, he worked here in Tenafly, he loved all the people. That was his great gift. You know, Peter let everybody into his life, never excluded anybody. And it was a wonderful world. We should all try it. If you let people in, it's great. Every kind of person was in Peter's life. He loved all of this here in Jersey, in the Jersey parishes. He also liked to cross that river. And as he drove across that George Washington Bridge, Peter was the only one that looked at the bridge pavement and saw the yellow brick road to New Oz. And when it came to finding a nursing home for Peter, we found the perfect place. Carmelite Sisters in the Big Apple. The Carmelite province of the most pure heart of Mary was so generous in taking care of Peter. They gave Peter the very, very best. Father Myron watched over Peter faithfully. His New York family would visit Peter. They came. They would have meetings in his room. His New Jersey family visited, and they learned something about New York. Parking was very expensive. The sisters were wonderful. Roxanne, his Saturday caregiver, was great. And his angel, Christina, was beyond description. She was his second great American gift, which was strange because she was from Ireland. I would visit Peter and we would talk, and near the end of the conversation, as time went on, I realized Peter was getting diminished. He would talk, and then he couldn't find the right word, and then he couldn't remember the right name. He would tell a story, and halfway through, he would lose track of the plot. And he would stop dead and think, try to find his place, and then he would say to me, "Ashley, that story will be continued at a later date." At the end of the visit, I would announce that I was leaving, and we had a little ritual. I would say to Peter, "Peter, I have only one thing to say to you." And he would say, he knew what the answer was going to be, but he would say, "What?" And I said, "Goodbye." But he never accepted the goodbye, and he would say, "To be continued." We believe in redemption. We believe in the resurrection. Peter is with God, with Tom and Susan, Leo and Bill. We give thanks. And Peter, I have only one thing to say to you: to be continued.